This is my first seed starting day of the year, so this is the very beginning of my garden. And I thought that since this is the beginning of my garden for the year, it would also be a really good time to kind of talk about how my goals have changed with my garden, especially as it relates to what's currently happening in the United States, because the current political climate has absolutely changed how I am viewing this endeavor. And it's also really affected a lot of my personal habits. And so I want to talk about that today while I'm getting these seeds starting. I started this channel several years ago when I first moved into this house and I moved to Maine, and I started trying to work on growing on a larger scale. But I would say that up until this point, gardening has been more of a hobby and kind of an expensive hobby, if I'm being real. And a big part of that is because I've been so busy and I haven't had a lot of time to dedicate to making sure that I'm actually producing and especially preserving. I would say that for me, I usually run out of steam through the summer, and then a lot of food gets wasted. And because grocery prices have gotten so freaking expensive, I feel like I really need to actually start growing more of my own food. I need this to be less of a hobby and a little bit more of a life practice. And I've always wanted gardening to be that for me personally. It's just, I feel like other priorities got in the way. Other events. Last summer, for example, I had a newborn, and the summer before that I was pregnant. And this year it is a priority because our grocery bill has gone up probably $100 a week in the last year and a half. And I anticipate that that's going to continue to be the case. I am also focusing a lot more on foods that can be preserved, more so than foods that I find novel. So in the past, I have tried out a lot of different varieties. I have done kind of novel, cute things. And now the way that I'm approaching planning my garden and the varieties I'm choosing is also quite a bit different. And I think for me, working on this project of increasing my personal food security feels a lot like safety to me. It is something that makes me feel more regulated and more calm in this particular era, which is really hard to do. It's also been hard to dream about my garden for the last couple of months and not be able to start working on it. So I'm really glad to be able to do that now. But that brings me to something I really actually want to talk about today. And that is, what do we do? How do we start? I think a lot of people since the election have really felt like there's a lot of things you can do. A lot of it doesn't feel very effective. And I think for many people, myself included, there are so many other worries that you have. Just in your life, just in surviving, just in keeping up with your job and your family and your responsibilities and making sure the laundry is done, that also stepping up for your community and engaging in any kind of activism feels very, very, very out of reach. And I will say that I have definitely felt that way. And it has made me feel hopeless and lost. And I want to kind of lay out what has been helpful for me and what you can do and how you can start taking those steps sustainably. The first thing I will say is that it is really hard to take any kind of action if you are in a fear state, if you are in freeze. It is really hard to take any kind of action. And so I would say that if you're thinking about political action and getting involved and advocating for what you want this country to look like, the first thing that you need to do is figure out what it is you need to do to get out of a freeze state. For me personally, I felt very unsafe. I felt very unsafe about I'm a very privileged person. I am white. Me and my husband both own our own businesses, so getting fired is not a concern for us. And also, we own our house, and we bought at a time where interest rates were low, so our mortgage is relatively low, and we're in a low cost of living area. So we have a ton of privilege, and we are also insulated in a lot of ways that a lot of people aren't. And so for me personally, my fear points have been just if the cost of living is going to outpace our ability to earn income. That has felt very insecure for me. If the safety of our food with a lot of the things going on is going to be affected. And so for me, engaging in food access work for my family and building resiliency makes me feel safe. This may not feel like a big thing for a lot of people, but for me personally, this is what has helped me get out of my free state. And has brought me to a place where I feel like I can start doing other things. The other thing too, in terms of grocery costs, is bulk buying, I think, is another thing that has helped me feel a little bit more safe. So if I can buy things in bulk at a lower cost, if they can be things like dried beans and grains, which my family eats a lot of, and we can store those, then that also makes me feel a little bit more secure. So that's been important. And so after doing these kinds of activities, the next thing that I was really making me feel hopeless was that I didn't feel connected. I felt like I was alone. I felt like I didn't have people working with me. And so me and several of my friends have been building a community network of people who are like-minded in my area. We are working on meeting together a lot more regularly. We are starting to do more bartering and Skillshare rather than buying new to help us basically meaningfully participate in the economy as little as possible, because that feels like a type of activism that feels a lot more accessible. Because I live rurally, so going to protests is not, especially with a young little one, is a little bit more challenging for me and the other people in my area. And the nice part of having community is that everybody in my community has a different thing that they're passionate about, that they're working on. So some people are, getting together to create information and to do more education kind of advocacy. Some people are a little bit more into protesting. Again, for me, the food aspect is a little bit more in my interest and my wheelhouse, and it helps me stay regulated. So that has been a project that I have taken on. I feel as though, I know a lot of people feel like boycotting certain corporations is not going to accomplish much, but I really feel like there can be no stone unturned. And so boycotting and no longer using Amazon and Walmart and those kinds of resources feels really useful and important for me personally right now. And it does for a lot of people in our community. However, not everybody can afford to not use those resources. And again, where I live rurally, getting things shipped is very convenient. It can be hard if you need to drive a longer distance to get certain items. And so one of the things that I have done is, I think activism is not just about doing things yourself, but it's also about helping your community, the people in your community, enabling them to also participate, right? So like if you have littles and you can't go protest or you don't feel comfortable to, can you provide childcare to people who do want to participate so that they can go? That is still activism. It is still activism. So for me, that means that I have started facilitating community bulk buying. So a lot of the people in my community live further afield than I do. So for me, doing Costco runs, ordering things online in bulk is a way that I really feel like I can help enable my community to also participate in these boycotts that we all really would like to participate in. It also helps them have groceries at a cheaper cost, which makes them feel more secure. Right? So for me, the first thing I did was help myself feel regulated. And the next thing I did is I'm trying to help enable my community to feel more secure and feel more regulated and have their needs met and make sure that that feels more resilient. And for a while, that was kind of where I started, because that's what helped me feel good. And now I think I feel a little bit more comfortable. I feel a little bit more secure in my community and in what I'm doing. And so from that point, I started to expand. So yes, I am participating now in the boycotts. It took me a while. We started with Amazon and with my family. And then we started to figure out what it needed to look like for us to step away from Walmart and some other retailers as well. So, I'm slowly cutting all of those out of my life, and I intend to do that permanently, not just for the immediate future, not just for the month, but in perpetuity, unless things change. And I doubt that Amazon's going to suddenly become an ethical company. After that, the next thing I did was start to build, and this is something I'm still working on, a practice of calling my representatives. I am very phone call adverse. I really don't want to do that. I really hate doing it. I hate taking the time. I hate looking up the numbers. I hate thinking of what to say. I hate I hate all of that, which is funny for somebody who has no problem stepping in front of a camera and talking and being in social media, why this phone call would be so for me, but it is. And so my goal was to use 5 calls and do the 5 calls a day, but I found that when I put that as my metric, I'm going to do 5 calls every single day. It's going to be like hygiene. I'm going to keep doing it. It was on my list of things to do for ages and it just didn't get done. And so I realized, well, hey, that's apparently my brain does not want to do that, but this is something that's important to me. So can we start smaller? Now, I live in the state of Maine. I have 3 representatives, 2 of which typically vote Democrat and are doing a lot of the things I would want them to do already. And then the other one is Susan Collins. And so I said, okay, I think that I can do the most good if I was going to make 1 call a day and have that be my goal, to put all my energy in pressuring Susan Collins, because I think that that is going to be the best use of my time. So I started there. I said, okay, fine. I'm not doing 5 calls a day. I'm doing 1 call a day. I'm going to do 1 call every single day. It's going to take me all of 3 minutes. And I'm going to start to build my tolerance of engaging in that particular task. And so I've been doing that for the last week, and I don't want to put any brain power into it. So at the beginning of the week, I just laid out exactly what I wanted to talk to her about every single day that week. So on Monday, I yapped to her about tariffs. On Tuesday, I yapped to her about Medicaid. On Wednesday, I yapped to her about the CFPB. On and on and on, every single week. And I planned it out. So I didn't have to think about what I was going to talk to her about on the day. And you know what? That actually felt really easy. Then that helped me actually get started. And so now I've increased it to 2 calls a day, and I have added Hakeem Jeffries to my list. So every single day, I call Susan Collins, and then I call Hakeem Jeffries, and I give him a little bit of a piece of my mind because I don't think he's doing enough. And so once I have gotten to 5 calls a day, and I feel very comfortable with that, and I feel like I can take on more, then I'm going to take on more. And I'm going to keep taking on more until I feel overwhelmed. So again, you start small. You start with what feels accessible. You doesn't have to be everything all at once. All the ways that you can show up for your community, that you can withhold your buying power or your labor in order to affect change, because, I mean, money is the only thing that capitalists actually respond to. All of those things, if enough people do them and we start to create distress tolerance around engaging in that, is going to add up to something eventually. But in order for these strategies to actually do anything, enough people have to be doing them. And I think a big barrier to that is that a lot of people feel like what we need right now is something big, and they don't feel like they have it in them to do something big. And so it has to be a muscle. People don't start out by running a marathon. They start out by running a 5K. And so just like that, we need to start exercising that muscle. And we need to do it every day, and we need to do it a little bit, and then we slowly build until we're to a place where we can do something big. So don't talk yourself out of it, because the options that seem like they're available to you don't feel like they're enough. It's okay that they're not enough. We know it's not enough. That's not the point. And I think that there's something that we need in order for us to properly resist this current regime. And it's something that a lot of people have called for, but nobody's actually putting forth. And that is an actual vision for what we want the future to look like. We know we don't want Trump. What do we want instead? Because the Democratic Party is not putting forth a vision, and a lot of these content creators that are saying that we need a vision are also not putting out a vision. So what is it that we want? What is it that we want to accomplish? What is the reality that we want to be living in? Now, I don't know everything. I am just a person who has ideas about politics, but I like to dream, so dream with me, because this is the version of America that I would really like to see. I want to live in a world where I am not afraid that one disaster, one car accident, one bad diagnosis is going to ruin not only me, but my family. Because I have worked very hard to build what I have, and I'm going to continue to work hard to cultivate those things. And I don't want just random misfortune to be able to take that away from me in one fell swoop. Because if I'm being perfectly honest, I live in fear a lot of the time. I feel like I live in a environment of hypervigilance where I am constantly looking out for threats, because any small thing could topple this mountain that I have been working on climbing for my entire life. That is not a reality that I want to live in anymore, and that is not a reality that I want anyone in this country to live in. And I bet you anything that most Trumpers would probably agree with me on that. And so what would we need for that reality? What would we need for that reality? Well, the first thing that we would need is universal health care, because medical debt is one of the #1 reasons why we have bankruptcy in this country. Now, I've heard a lot of people on the right say, well, if we just get government out of it and we let the markets compete normally, it will fix this whole issue and everything will be fine and dandy and it will bring costs down. But the truth is that it's not good enough to just bring costs down, because it doesn't matter how down they go. If there is a cost at the point of service and you have to pay to play, healthcare is always going to be completely inaccessible for anybody who doesn't make a certain amount of income. And that is not an equitable society. That means that the only people who don't deserve to die if shit hits the fan are people with money. And there's no reason for that to be the case. There is no amount that we could feasibly reduce the cost of healthcare down to that wouldn't completely bankrupt somebody making minimum wage if they broke their leg or they got cancer or they had any sort of actual health emergency. And I think that the people who talk about this, who say that this is going to be the way forward, are really only thinking about the cost of primary care visits, not the cost of any actual sick care. Now, the other thing that I think really needs to change is the way that we do work in this country and the way ownership of businesses is in this country. Now, when people talk about socialism or a socialist system or the fears of things getting too socialist, and they're doing that fear mongering, the end game that they seem to be very, very, very afraid of is a reality where everybody gets paid the same, where nobody gets rewarded for excellence or for good ideas or for their labor, because basically everyone is treated exactly the same. It doesn't matter how smart they are, it doesn't matter how successful they are, it doesn't matter whatever. And they feel like that's going to de-incentivize excellence and innovation. But the reality is that our current system does that. Our current system does not reward success for the vast majority of people. Amazon is a triumph in terms of what it was able to accomplish. It is vastly successful. It was an excellent idea. But I think the question people aren't asking is, who is getting rewarded for that? Who is getting rewarded for that company doing well? It's kind of just a few people at the top. It's the mega investors. It's the people on the board. It is not the workers. It is not the people who show up every day to make that company work. It's not the people who actually created the value of that product. And anybody who has worked at almost any job can tell you stories of how frustrating it is to care about your job and care about the work that you do and not actually get rewarded for it. A company can turn the best profit of the year, but for the most part, workers don't see any return. They don't get to see the benefit of that work and that labor that they put in. They don't get a seat at the table. They may have wonderful ideas, innovative ideas that could actually make the company more successful and produce better products. But the way that current systems are, most of the people who work at a company have absolutely zero say and zero ability to be creative and to provide input. I argue that that particular system actually disincentivizes innovation, and it's one in which people are not rewarded for excellence. And so when we're talking about a more socialist system and a more equitable work environment, I think we need to be very specific about what that means. That doesn't mean everybody making the same amount of money. That doesn't mean no innovation and people not being rewarded for work. That means everybody who's at a company, everybody who's at a business who is contributing to something being successful gets rewarded, not just the people at the very, very top. So workplaces should be cooperative and they should be democratically run. The workers of the company should reap just as much reward as the person at the top because they are the people who are creating value. Imagine for a second what that would do for the American people. Just imagine what that would do to our communities and to the economic prosperity of our people if the only rule that we had is that companies of a certain size had to be worker-owned co-ops, that a certain percentage of the board had to be people who worked at that company, that compensation scales had to be set democratically and agreed upon by all the people who work there. People would have agency in their workplace. They would have more ownership over it. We would have a greater diversity of ideas. More money would stay in our communities, and it absolutely wouldn't disincentivize excellence, and people would be rewarded for their work. It's just everybody would be rewarded for good work. The other thing that I think is really important is environmental stewardship. I think that climate change is an existential threat, and it's something that we need to address. Even if you think that climate change is a hoax, why would you vote and advocate for policies that make our environment worse. When there are opportunities that make our waters cleaner and our air cleaner and our beaches more beautiful, and why would you fight against that? Again, even if climate change isn't real, don't you want our world to be beautiful and to be livable and to be pristine? Don't you want that? That is an angle that I just can't fathom. I just can't. Anyway, I don't know how to end this. That was just a rant while I do my seed starting, and I'll probably do more of this every time that I do anything in my garden, because honestly, I feel like this is cathartic for me. And this is just one more small way that I can engage in activism. Maybe one day my thoughts will become a little bit more coherent, and yeah, I don't know. Anyway, have a nice day.